Welcome to China Manufacturing Decoded from Southeast, the podcast where we take you through the major news and topics facing importers and manufacturers in China and Asia today.
Hello everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of China Manufacturing Decoded, our podcast that comes out every week. And this week is a treat. I'm joined by Marshal Taplits, who used to be in Shenzhen, and we met quite a few times there. He was in Shoko, and when I was living in the Futian area, for people who know Shenzhen, he's been involved in the broader ecosystem, and we're going to talk about that. And he's in the US. Maybe Marshall, do you want to do a self intro? Maybe you can talk about that a little bit better than I do.
Sure. Thank you, Renaud, for having me on your program, first of all. And it's a shame we don't get to see each other as much, but that's how it is these days. But yes, I lived in Shenzhen for, I think it's 17 years. And, during that time, I did a variety of things. But the main thing was we built an e-commerce company, mainly selling on Amazon, but also on Walmart and Wayfair and a bunch of others. And so I've experienced the Amazon selling side for a number of years. And then when COVID hit, we came to the US and started this warehouse, Ship It Done, essentially fulfilling for other e-commerce sellers. And so, yeah, I've seen, a lot of what goes on the manufacturing side over the last 20 years. And I've also seen what's been happening over the last 2.5 years or so physically in the US in terms of all the logistics and what people are trying to do here. So that's mainly my background.
Cool. Yeah. And so your business is Ship It Done. So it's really all about logistics now. You're much more involved in logistics for fulfillment, whereas before you were more involved in actually doing e-commerce, the buying and selling and the marketing and all these things around that.
Exactly.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Good.
And Ship It Done was started essentially because there really aren't a lot of warehouses that can properly do, bulk in and out of pallets and containers, as well as, all the way down to the ASIN labeling and, repackaging with Amazon for all of their limitations. And it's just a different process than most warehouses are used to. And a lot of the e-commerce specific warehouses are very small. And so they're fantastic, but it's hard to scale. So we set ourselves up in Pennsylvania, which for those who are familiar with the US or not, but it's basically a 4-hour drive from a few cities, New York, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Baltimore, Maryland. So it's kind of like a central location that we set up in on the East Coast. Basically, that's because where I grew up, not because it's necessarily better for Amazon sellers, but that's where we are.
Is it still true? Is it still true that 2/3 of the American population lives east of Mississippi?
I believe that's true. I mean, the country started in the east side and then kind of migrated west over time. So I can't guarantee that, but it makes a lot of sense. And we definitely notice when our customers, FBM and other fulfillment, where we're not just sending to FBA, but where we're actually doing the fulfillment ourselves. It does seem like a lot of the business is going to the East Coast or in the Midwest. You get a lot of California and Texas, but other than that, it seems to be East Coast, down to Florida, and through the Midwest.
Yeah, not that many people in Wyoming or North Dakota or something. Yeah, that makes sense. So since you've been very closely involved with e-commerce, and I'll get to the general situation about shipping and things like that just a little bit later in the episode. But my first question, because I'm really curious, we read, why is there such, a huge logjam, and why are logistics such a mess these days? And one of the explanations that people give is there's more stuff because people could not go to their Starbucks or to restaurants or to cinema and so on. So they had nothing to do. They went on Amazon or wherever, and they bought more stuff, more home office, gym, outdoor products, entertainment products, whatever. And that represented a very high volume to ship. Is that correct? Have you seen that?
I personally think that that's a little bit of a simplistic view. Yes, it's true that when COVID started and people got locked in their house, they consumed a lot less services. And at that time, the government was also giving various stimulus checks. And so, one could argue that people bought more stuff. And I think that there's an element of that. But I think what happened behind that is that when COVID hit, the entire supply chain kind of just stopped. And so whatever was in stock in our just-in-time system, that we've had in our country since the 80s, since, copying Japan, how they invented that, it was just real quick before the inventories dried up. And then the companies just started ordering as much as they could because they realized that the demand is still there, if not growing, at least stable. And by that time, they were behind the curveball on the inventory. Everybody's over ordering. There's all sorts of shortages. China shut down, their side at the port a few times. But I really do believe the fundamental problems are the logistics costs related to the U.S. port system and the internal logistics system.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yes. So what you're saying is it's a little bit of a bullwhip effect. So you have some variations coming from the buying countries. And they run out of stock, then they order much more, and then after a it's like a wave, and then these variations actually get amplified by the time to restock, and it just drove the whole systems to the ground, right? That's a little bit of what you're saying.
That's exactly right. And I would add on top of it that as now customers, not my customers, but companies that are purchasing product from overseas, everybody now is trying to move away from just in time and actually have stock. So you're not only getting the bullwhip effect of the demand compared to the supply at that moment, but now you've got a permanent, I don't know how permanent, but you've got a long road ahead where all the companies want to create an inventory stock and move away from this just in time. So is that higher demand? Well, not really. It just means that companies are going to be putting more in warehouses, which is, a good thing overall. But again, it drastically increases the amount of volume having to go through the system without much really in the way of the end customer necessarily buying more right now.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, people say just in time, but it's a joke. When people refer to, Toyota or Honda or these companies, because these companies do just in time, but, when they make cars, but first their key suppliers set up their own factories next to the automotive assembly factory. So it's like, they load it in a truck and they deliver it 5 minutes or 10 minutes later. So it's much easier. And then you have some suppliers even a little bit further away. They might deliver just in time, but they're not like an ocean away. They don't do just in time with sources that are an ocean away. But the parts
that they're using, even though they're nearby, are coming from far away. So like, for example, when we were selling on Amazon and e-commerce, we would have a container arrive that we would pretty much have it, get processed and sent into FBA right away. And, we kind of had let's say, call it a container a month, right? But we never really wanted to have a lot of stock in the US, right? But now everybody's saying, oh my God, we're missing Christmas. Chinese New Year's coming up, the supply chain's unstable. Why don't we just send an extra container, so that it's there?
Right.
And
just in case,
not just in time. Is it just in case? Exactly. Just in time to just in case. And so when you multiply that across the entire economy, it does give the appearance of more demand.
Yes, definitely. Well, good for businesses like yours, I guess. Need more.
Sometimes I wish we were on the West Coast to benefit more from it, but yeah, I mean, overall, warehousing and logistics, and especially people, not to toot my horn or anything, but a lot of people here in the U.S. they just don't know the details of manufacturing, what it takes to manufacture things and acquire the raw materials and do the logistics and do the importing and do the routing and pallets and this and that, and so. Whereas in China, there's like everyone understands all of this. And so you could get back on your feet so easily. But a lot of people here, they've never dealt with a situation like this. The last real supply chain problem in the US was the oil embargo, which was in the 1970s, which I heard about from my parents. I wasn't even alive for it. So, all the people who are in their 20s and 30s and even 40s, that are in the power in these companies, doing the buying decisions, doing the modeling of what should happen. Everybody's trying their best, but it's really not the same level of knowledge that we're used to seeing in Asia, in terms of the knowledge of what the end-to-end system looks like.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. I mean, talking about inventory, there's also a lot of inventory held up in Shenzhen, Dongguan, and, in close to Ningbo and so on, because all these containers that they're trying to book and they're waiting, and sometimes they're waiting a couple of months or even longer. Well, they made the stuff and they keep making stuff. Their warehouses, of the factories are full. And then they have to find some external space to keep it somewhere. And of course, they're not very happy to pay for all these charges. But that's another knock-on effect. Not enough shipping capacity, and there's a big bottleneck before shipment, and plus another big bottleneck right after delivery in the US, right? So people, look at it, and there are some articles about that, and basically what I understand, and they focus a lot on the West Coast, and especially on Los Angeles and Long Beach. Basically, what it looks like is that a lot of ships are waiting, even sometimes drifting, because they cannot put the containers down, because the parking lot next to it is already full of containers, right, because there's not enough rail capacity and not enough trucking capacity to get them away from the port infrastructure. Again, is this simplified? What's right? What's wrong here? Is that the main problem?
It is the main problem, but it's like a bunch of systems working on their own that are bumping up into each other as opposed to a smoothly oiled machine. And I'll just give you a few examples. So in Europe and Asia, the ports have been running 24/7 for years. Our ports don't. They run, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. or something like that, like very normal business hours. And our politicians have tried to, push it more in the 24/7 direction. But the truth is, it's all privately owned. They don't, making investments takes time. You can't make an investment and build capacity while you're in crisis. It is union labor, which has its positives and negatives, but one of the negatives is it's not easy, in terms of flexibility. You can't just create another shift, and you can't just, tell regular workers to work double shifts. It all has to go through, unions and negotiation. Right. And because there's such backup at the ports, the trucking companies, which used to be able to get in and out of a port in about an hour or two and be able to pull 3 or 4 containers in a day, are now finding that they can only pull 1 in a day, and everything is slow and backed up because they're ready to pick up the truck and it's not there yet, the container, sorry. And so you get into all these situations where everybody's kind of wasting their time. There's delivery slots at the ports, thousands of them going unused because the truckers, are not getting there basically in time. And the truckers themselves are saying, I can't survive, if I can only do 1 pull a day, I'll starve. Right. And a lot of the truckers are owner operated, which means that it's their truck and they work for themselves, and they do routes based on whoever pays them to go, and they get paid per load in general. But the dock workers, they get paid per hour. So you can imagine the truckers are pretty upset, as the dock workers are taking their time because they're getting paid per hour and taking a lunch break. And the truckers are, they only get this amount of money, period. It's a flat rate. So there's a lot of problems there. And then additionally, the rail system is all backed up because a lot of people have been trying to get their product from the West Coast once it gets out of the port. out to warehouses in the Midwest or even the East Coast. And that's not happening, either, because that's all backed up. I'm not as familiar as why the rails are backed up, probably just because they're overutilized compared to their capacity, but that I'm not an expert on. So I think it's all these things combined. It's not a functioning end-to-end system. It's all these pieces with their own interests hitting up against each other.
Yeah. And I don't know, was it a couple of weeks back where we saw, President Biden is pushing them to operate 24 hours a day, and there's been a little bit of progress, or is it still the way you described?
I think it's the way I described it. I mean, the people in power right now, and again, I don't want to get political, but I mean, just in terms of their experience, we've got, we just don't have people in the right positions that understand supply chain. And I'm not sure if it would have been any different, under a previous president or a future president. But what I do know is that, for all the good things that people like Biden and the Democrats can do, one of the downsides is that they typically come from an academic perspective and don't have as much real world experience. And in particular, when you're trying to unlock an entire country's energy issues combined with supply chain issues, combined with labor issues, you really need more buy-in from the businesses, because at the end of the day, it is a private economy for the most part. And, Americans are an interesting bunch. We're not good at being commanded to do things. And especially when it seems to come from the outside. So I personally think that the ports and the truckers and everything kind of dismissed what Biden is saying. And not because they don't want to do it, it's just what can really be done. Again, it's separate companies, each with their own interests and, labor unions and all these things. So you just can't turn it on a dime. I don't, without trying to be a negative sounding, I don't see this getting fixed in the very near time. I mean, Christmas is coming up, and that's basically Chinese New Year for America in terms of staffing. And the staffing is already way down. I don't want to be a downer, but I can't put my finger on a specific way that this can get resolved, without it just kind of over time working itself out.
Right. Well, talking about the future, I mean, then February and actually starting end of January, a lot of pretty much all the factories in China will close, and then it's Chinese New Year is not only in China, so it impacts a little bit of the rest of Southeast Asia. During that time, it's going to be virtually no production for a couple of weeks, and then a lot of factories are going to be closed more like 3-4 weeks really, or very, very slow for a couple of weeks when they restart. So all of that to say, right before Chinese New Year, usually there's a big push to just finish that order and ship it out. Right. And not keep work in process, materials lying around, just try to push everything out so we can get the payments and we're back on our feet when we come back as much as possible. But then there's going to be very little production. And let's say, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, little to no production. Is that going to give a little bit of breathing air to the whole supply chain systems, or do you think that there's so much of a jam that it's not going to make much difference?
I think you really hit it on the head, actually. And, everyone here is talking about Christmas and Christmas and Christmas. Nobody here has even mentioned Chinese New Year. And, as you said, that is a time when production stops. And, I really, really hope that the U.S. Uses that time to figure out how to clear, just clear everything out. And because there's not going to be another time, that's the time when they gotta, get everything cleared out and wait for the next batches, which start, a month or two after Chinese New Year. And my personal hope is that that's exactly what they do, is that they use that time to clear it out.
Yeah. Well, all right. So what if it doesn't really all get cleared out? Maybe there's, the amount of containers, on the water, waiting to be put on a truck or put on the rails, goes down, but only by, I don't know, half or 2/3. And then there's still an enormous traffic jam, and then China starts to ship again. This could last for another entire year, right?
Well, this is the thing. It's like, those shippers who have contracted long-term rates are getting their product to market, right? I mean, if you go to the stores are full. Not completely full. There are definitely noticeable areas that are empty. But in general, nobody's been looking for anything here. But when I search on Amazon, I see a lot of products that are out of stock, that used to be in stock. So I definitely think this is affecting the smaller companies more who don't have contracted rates. Of course, the chip thing is hurting everybody, even the large companies. But I mean, in terms of just getting normal containers over, it just seems to be that the larger you are, the better off you are, which is unfortunate. But some companies, like I read yesterday or 2 days ago in the paper, that American Eagle, which is a pretty famous clothing company here, they just bought a logistics company that owns ships and trucks, and they're like, they're just going to do it themselves, basically. Right. That is a huge change. I mean, everything for the last 20, 30 years has been about focusing on your competitive advantage, outsourcing, to companies who are better than you, and specialize in these areas. And what more obvious thing than, owning the brand, developing, your product, and then outsourcing it for manufacturing, and then outsourcing it for logistics. It almost seems just blatantly obvious. But now, we're having some of these companies say, no, this isn't going to work. And now they're going vertically integrated again.
Right.
So, on one hand, that's a sign that maybe this is going to be going on for a long time. It may also be a sign that as the larger companies handle their own logistics, maybe it'll be more of a regular market for small to medium-sized businesses.
Do you think so?
But again, this all takes time. Well, I do think so to a certain extent, because as well, there's only a few shipping companies. It's really consolidated over the years, and that is also causing a problem. And so I think there is a global movement, including in the U.S., where where entire huge markets are dominated by 3 or 4 players, whether it's the meat industry, whether it's the logistics industry, the shipping. I think it is going to go into another cycle of decomposition and more competition. But it's going to take time. I mean, this is not like by next year. I mean, this is a decade process,
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Home Depot started that, right? And then I think, Walmart went in that direction also. And then I forgot 1 or 2 others. And then, but the problem is the bottleneck is still the same. The bottleneck is still how many containers are available, loading things, unloading things, getting the
but if
container
you're smaller,
pick up.
If you're smaller, you have more flexibility. You can, if it's your own company with your own container, for example, you can say, okay, just go up to Seattle and unload, or take a round trip, or, this one's going to go to Florida just because that's right now where there's, no congestion. Whereas these other carriers like Maersk and whoever else, they're more like airplanes. These are the routes, which plane do you want to get on? Right. So I do think there's going to be more of that. But how does that affect small to medium-sized businesses? It's just going to be more pain for a little while.
I was thinking also that I read somewhere that, is it Coca-Cola or another company? There's certain things that they use to ship by containers, and then you need these specialized ships that are all geared up for a bunch of these boxes, right? And they use those other ships. I forgot, that ship loose merchandise, basically.
Yes, that they use to ship colon and things. I've read that as well.
Yeah, and that is smart, because that's really going around the constraint, and because the rates for non-container shipping is nowhere near container shipping is these days. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So one thing I didn't even know, because growing up, in the era of container shipping, it never even really occurred to me that wasn't always a standard. But the more you read, it's like the entire concept of having containers and using container ships, it's not actually that, that it hasn't always been that way. And, previously ships were like this, where they're just open hull ships, and you pour in what you want to ship and move it over. So it is a step backwards, in terms of in terms of productivity and cost. But at the end of the day, exactly what you said, they're breaking out of the construct of the system and finding, alternatives around.
Exactly.
And which is also helpful because if you can, then that takes pressure off of the main system. But I always bring it back to small to medium sized business, just because, that's the world that I come from. And, how do we get back on our feet as a collective we? And I think, you got to just stay out of the system as much as you can, in terms of if you can manufacture somewhere else, which is not easy, but, if you can long term, if you can, do more by air, if it's light, if it's worth it in the meantime. But, it may just not be a great time to launch a new product. It just may be the time to just worry about, your current products and keeping them in stock.
Right.
The other unknown is the cost of the actual shipping. Like right now, it's not toward its peak, but I mean, it hit, it was like $40,000 or something to ship a container. And then, it used to be, when I started, like $1,500. So how can you absorb those costs? You can't, right? So they either have to be temporary or everybody's got to start paying a lot more for everything. And so, so for people who, let's say you got into Amazon, for example, right before COVID, and you missed the first ship over. I mean, you're in it's just a really tough spot to be in, right? And totally bad luck. I mean, nobody did anything wrong. If you already have a good selling product, you may be willing to pay more to keep it in stock. But, again, even with the way the port's working, now they're charging $100 a day and increasing fees. This just started 2 days ago. So they're bringing in $500,000 a day, from what I heard, just in an extra fee that they just started. So the ports, really seem to be taking a hard line attitude toward this and basically just saying, we believe you'll get the containers out if the price is high enough. And, the truckers are saying, well, it's not our stuff and it's not worth it for us to come. And the people are saying, I'll pay anything, just get it out. It's very challenging.
Yeah. Yes. Not very nice. Yes. What about on the East Coast? Because you said you're in Pennsylvania, in the Northeast, basically. So let's say some of your customers, they send like a wool batch to over to you. What port do you work with the most?
So the most is New York Elizabeth, but we also work with Baltimore, and those are the main ones that people are using. I would say New York mostly.
Right. And
specifically in New Jersey, there's the Elizabeth port right next to New York.
Okay. And how's it been going? Is it as congested as in LA? Is it much better?
Well, it's definitely better, but it's not perfect. In general, the non-California ports are better. Even the governor of Florida the other day said, please come here. Like we got a wide open port. Because really, usually the East Coast and the south of the U.S., they usually bring in from Mexico and South America, whereas the West Coast is more for China. So we do have a lot of capacity that's not being used. And I would say that New York is pretty full, but it's functioning fine. Maybe it'll take 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, from the time it lands to get to our warehouse, which isn't terrible. I mean, it wasn't really that much better, even when things were good. Maybe it would be 2 weeks instead of a week and a half. So I would say it's still functioning. The biggest problem that we have now is because there's not a lot of truckers and not a lot of the chassis to pick up the containers out of the port. So what's happening is we're about 4 hours away and a driver will not drive. They used to be able to, but now they refuse to drive 4 hours with the container. So if it's palletized, it's no problem because they just transload it at the port. They just take the containers, take the pallets off the container with a forklift, put it directly onto a 45-foot standard truck, and then they drive that up to us. And that's really not a problem. It's totally standard. But a lot of the customers, they want to floor load their containers, which of course makes sense because you want to get as much product in there as possible. But the problem then is that when it lands, now it has to be brought to a warehouse, to palletize it essentially. And now you're paying labor rates in the US
to
unload the container and palletize it. And then it still has to come to us before it goes out, because those warehouses don't know e-commerce and can't do fulfillment because they're just designed to process things coming out of the port. So, you get a lot of extra costs if you floor load.
Loose cartons, might cost you a lot of money.
So you really got to do the math. But that's the situation. I mean, the East Coast is fine. I mean, we're humming along. But if you have full containers floor loaded, it's still challenging.
Right. What about air cargo? Do you get a lot of products from by air? And
we are.
How is it working? Is it as functional as before?
Yeah, it's totally fine. It's great. I mean, a lot of our new customers, we get a lot of our customers now from customers that are on Amazon that need to do removal orders because their storage is too high and things like that. So we'll typically get some like that. And then a lot of times they want to launch a new product, which they've already launched, but due to the Amazon rules now, they had to take out some of their other product because it's like a total amount that you're allowed to store, not based on ASIN anymore. So they'll pull some out with a removal order. Then they'll air some of their new products to us, get it on Amazon, see if it's working. Sometimes they'll even just put it on as FBM until the container arrives. But yeah, they're front loading it with air, which is something we were always doing years ago. But then as the companies kind of grew up, we just started shipping containers. It seems a little bit back to test it by air before you spend the money on the container.
So just two things to make sure people understand. First, you said FBM means fulfillment by merchant, right? So it means you're not actually sending the products to the Amazon fulfillment center. You are just listing it, or your customers, right? The e-commerce brands are listing it on Amazon, but then a company like yours maybe fulfills the orders like out of your warehouse. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So FBA is fulfilled by Amazon, which means we, wrap up a pallet of products, send it in for you, and then Amazon will send it out, fulfill it to the customer on each order. With FBM, fulfilled by merchant, basically we just keep the products in our warehouse, so you have a lower storage costs. You don't have to pay for it to get to Amazon. If there's any issue, we can resolve it. You don't have to do a removal order. So it gives people a lot more confidence. And it is true that the sales can be lower with FBM than FBA, but they're still pretty good. We have a lot of customers selling FBM now, and they really like it because, they're not paying the holiday Amazon storage fees. They're not paying the cost to get into Amazon. They're not paying, any long-term storage fees. They're just kind of, with their product. And a lot of the FBM customers that were selling well, now they just send, like a few cartons in to FBA at a time to help, the sales go up, but their base is still the FBM.
Yeah, I see what I mean. And then the second thing I wanted to just really clarify is you said that it often makes sense to front load a little bit by air. So what you're saying is that when, and a lot of these products are for Amazon's, right? So that comes from Amazon's rules that when you are listing a new product, Amazon only accepts, 200 pieces or something like that, a low quantity. You cannot send like 2,000 pieces to Amazon's warehouse. They don't accept. So at first, they force you to send a little amount of product, see if it works, and then if it works, if it sells out very fast, then you're like, how do I fulfill like the demand now? Maybe you have 10,000 pieces, but they're in China, right? So is that correct?
That's correct, and it's a challenge. So that's why I'm suggesting that if people send to a warehouse where it's cheap, essentially, to keep it there, and then start fulfilling Amazon FBA while having the backup in the 3PL warehouse. And this is not always possible because a lot of the warehouses that are right at the ports, they're expensive because they go by high volume, just unloading containers and getting them out. retail is still like 90% or something of all of U.S. Economic activity. So as much as e-commerce is growing, and it's growing, very fast, but it's still only like 10% or something of the entire United States retail industry. So, you just don't have these warehouses that are focused on helping in this way, which is kind of why you got to go further out, either where, to the middle of Pennsylvania where we are, or on the West Coast. People have started to find warehouses in Nevada and Utah, down in Texas, right? You seldom keep your products long-term storage in a warehouse in California. It's just too expensive. It's the same thing in New York.
Right. Well, I just have two other quick questions on that topic, and then we would be out of time basically. But question number one, is and that's from your perspective, because you're living that, you're on the East Coast. If I send a container from, let's say, from Shenzhen or from Shanghai to New York Port, New York Elizabeth, versus in California, Long Beach, is it going to be how much longer? Is it going to be another 10 days or?
So not counting port time, but it's basically 2 weeks to California from China, and it's basically 4 to 5 weeks to East Coast. So it's like double.
Okay, got it.
And the cost is about 20% more.
20% only. Okay. Yeah, just the last thing I'm wondering is, if you do fulfillment by merchant and you are right there in the East Coast where there's the highest density of population, I mean, a lot of the US population is there. When you ship products, it's not a flat rate to ship everywhere, right? If you ship to the next county, to the next zip code, it's much cheaper than sending all the way to San Diego. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. The further it goes, the more it costs and the longer it takes. So, the ideal scenario is you've got a West Coast, warehouse and an East Coast warehouse, and you have an order system that's splitting the orders. But that complexity also breeds cost. So,
yes,
what I tell my customers is, look, if you're really big and you want to make the investment, that's great. But you may just find that for where you are right now, picking one warehouse, whether it's ours or anybody else's, and just kind of giving them as much volume as you can in order to reduce the costs with them and reduce the shipping costs, that's probably the way to go. And yeah, it may cost $6 to ship, a product from our warehouse to somewhere in New Jersey, and it may cost $8 to Florida, and it may cost $12 to California. But the blended is still 9 or 8.5, right? And so if you just think of it like that, don't worry about each piece. But then as soon as you have enough volume and you have the data to support that, 35% of your shipments are coming from, the West Coast, and, the extra cost of the postage is this. So now you have this number to play with, whether it's you're paying $20,000 too much per quarter or whatever number you come up with. And then just figure out, what does it cost to now ship into 2 warehouses on the other side of the country, to keep them stocked? What if one of them's out of stock? All the things that come, with running a warehouse and fulfilling. I think when people run the numbers, they'll find that just play it safe and stay with one warehouse in the beginning. There are some services like Deliver, Delivr, which I'm not associated with, but they try to replicate the Amazon FBA concept, but with external warehouses. Some people have said they're good. I've heard bad stories. I've heard they're expensive. I've heard that they're fine. So I don't have a personal opinion. I've never used them, but basically what you're doing is similar to FBA. You're overpaying for everything so that it's the same price no matter what. And you just have to calculate whether that makes sense or not.
Right. Well, that was a deep focus on the economics of logistics in the US. That was really interesting. We're pretty much out of time. So thank you so much, Marshal. Just can you spell your website, just in case people want to get in touch with you or something?
Thank you. And I appreciate it, Renaud, and I'd love to come back another time as well. But for all the listeners, we are shipitdone.com, SHIPITDONE. And we're a 3PL warehouse handling Amazon and e-commerce fulfillment for all your other channels.
Great. All right. Thanks a lot, Marshal. And thanks to all the listeners, and we'll be back next week.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.